Hello everyone, and welcome back, or welcome to our fifth module of the Support for Caregivers of Bereaved Children group. So we are in our fifth module, or our fifth week, if you are attending this as part of our in-person group or our virtual group. And this week we are talking about self-care. So my name is Kayla Slegers, and I'm the Supportive Services Coordinator at St. Joseph's Hospice.
And hi, my name is Orly Culverhouse, and I'm the Caring Hearts Children's Program Coordinator and Music Therapist at St. Joseph's Hospice.
So I'm just going to go over an agenda of what we'll be talking about today. So just in a moment, we'll go over some housekeeping items. We're going to talk about what is self-care and what is self-compassion and kind of how they relate and how they're different. We will talk about asking for help and your support network. And then we will talk about teachable moments and ways to support or continue this theme at home with your child. And as always, we'll share some resources with you guys that are practical, that you can do at home and with your children or with your family. So just to go over this series and what we're doing, what this is all about. So this is our fifth week, or our fifth module of our 5-part series. So typically this would be an in-person group for caregivers or parents of a bereaved child. Whether or not your child is attending a grief and bereavement group with us at St. Joseph's Hospice or not, our group would be for caregivers or parents that would like to attend an in-person group and meet once a week. If your children are attending one of our children's groups for ages 6 to 9 or 10 to 13, they would be running alongside each other in the same building at the same time. But perhaps you do not have children in our group and you're attending it just because you would like more information. And you may be watching this alongside the children's program or on your own time. We are currently in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, so we are recording these webinars or these modules to share with parents and caregivers or busy parents anytime really to be a part of our program and just resourcing the community and caregivers that are taking care of children that may be grieving. So a little bit of our structure today, we will go through some content following our PowerPoint. And typically in our in-person group, we would have a bit more of a check-in and a check-out and room for discussion. But of course, for this purpose, we will not. But we encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments or want to discuss any material. If you are receiving this module via email, you will also be receiving handouts from this presentation, as well as some extra resources as attachments. But if you are watching this on our YouTube channel, because we have also posted all of these modules on our YouTube channel at Hospice Sarnia, then feel free to reach out to us as well, and we can send you the handouts and any resources that we have to go with today. So we encourage you to, watch all 5 of these. You don't have to. They are somewhat in order, so you may hear that we are referencing certain modules throughout our presentations. And today's our last one on self-care. And we know that sometimes this one can get missed, so we're so happy that you're here with us to talk all about self-compassion and self-care and taking care of yourself in order to do the best for your children. So I just want to start off by acknowledging life and how busy life can be. So I'm just going to start by reading a quote here for you guys. So life is busy. There are always tasks to do at home. Work is busy. It can be stressful. Your children need your time and energy, and your calendar is jammed. In an effort to keep your schedule under control, sometimes you skip meals, miss your class at the gym, or cancel plans with friends. I guess this isn't so much a quote, but more so a scenario that you may or may not relate to. But just acknowledging that we all have busy schedules, busy lives. Parenting can be overwhelming and time consuming, of course. We're constantly present and with our families. So it can be overwhelming at the best of circumstances, but also when you are caregiving for a child or a teen that may be grieving, it adds these extra stress, and especially if you're grieving yourself. So just taking time to acknowledge and realize that, You're human, life is busy. When you are caregiving for children and children that are grieving, it can be really exhausting and really overwhelming. So we hope that today you can take away some tools and tips for taking the best care of yourself and relating this and taking care of your family as well and for your kids. So next, Orly is going to talk a bit more about self-care and why it's so important.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm sure that most of us have heard the term self-care before. I think it's definitely kind of more of a buzzword these days. And I think the idea of self-care is pretty simple in theory, but in practice it can be a lot more complicated, especially if we are grieving, if we're caring for children, if we just got a lot of things going on. And a lot of people that we talk to at the hospice will say that self-care is usually, and I mean, I can attest for this in my own life, is that when things start to get tough, then self-care is usually the first thing that goes out the window. And so kind of pared down to its core, self-care is just mindfully taking some time to pay attention to you, really. It can be, we said, often can be overlooked, but it's really, really important many reasons, which we're going to go over in our presentation today. But there's so many good things about it, like we're modeling the behavior we want to see for our kids, modeling taking care of ourselves, and really we want to be in the best shape possible to be able to care for our children. And so it's really important that we're taking care of ourselves. I think also that self-care can be, I think, misconstrued a little bit. We often, when you hear the phrase self-care, lots of things might come to mind. I think, a lot of the times it's more like pampering activities, maybe going and getting a pedicure done or getting a facial or a massage, that kind of thing. And so I think that leaves some people thinking that self-care is kind of froofy, or I don't know what the word is, but it can also be kind of not accessible. Like not all of us can have money to go and get massages and that kind of thing. But really, when we're thinking of self-care as taking that mindful time to pay attention to ourselves, it's not just getting a pedicure or drinking green smoothies, but it might be saying no, right? That can be a form of self-care. So we also have self-care can be, it might be spending time alone. It might be saying no, putting yourself first, asking for what you need. It might be setting boundaries. So when we're grieving, there's lots of stuff going on. Maybe it's saying, okay, you know what, we're not going to be going out to as many activities because it's really important right now that we spend some time at home. So that's a form of self-care because you're setting that boundary, but we don't often think of it that way, if that makes sense. Some might be taking a step back, asking for help, might be staying at home, forgiving yourself. There's lots of self-care can be so many different things. And so I would just encourage you to think of self-care as something that refuels us rather than takes from us. And it really can be as in-depth or as simple as we would like to make it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care can also mean, these are just, we don't have to go over every single one, but it might be, knowing yourself and knowing what your limits are. So maybe if it might be kind of saying no to certain responsibilities if possible, or trying to be able to delegate responsibilities out or paring things down. It could be taking care of our physical bodies, like making sure, basics like we're getting enough sleep, we're drinking water, we're eating good foods if possible, if we have time, we're exercising, that kind of thing. It might be trying to find time throughout the day to decompress. This is not always easy, especially if you are a single parent now, right? If your spouse has died. But if you're able to get kind of those small moments, then that's great. It could be kind of taking time. Yeah.
I just jump in for a second. You had just mentioned, not to correct you, but you had said maybe it means finding time to do some of these things. But I think it also means making that time, right? To put yourself first. So if what exercise and sleep is what helps you get through the day, and if that's what is going to help you feel your ultimate best, it's making that time to make sure you're incorporating that into your day, right? Not just leaving it on the back burner to if we get time, right? Making it a priority for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's challenging. I guess, my It's about making that time. I just don't want to make people feel shamed, or that if you don't have that time, then we have to be realistic too. But it is really important to make time for those, those opportunities for self-care. So yeah, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It could be, oh, my dog is crying in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. He wants to be let outside.
Oh, no, can't hear it. Good.
It could be doing more of what you enjoy, thinking about, what are the things in my life that bring me joy, the things that I value, taking those times. Maybe it's moving your body, spending time with loved ones, having that opportunity to laugh. For some people, self-care, and like I'm definitely this person, is like cleaning and organizing and decluttering. And so if that's your thing, then I think also self-care is a very personal thing. So we're trying to find what works best for us. It might be doing things like music or yoga or meditation. For some people, it's being outside. For some people, it's spiritual practices, whether you're more of a spiritual person or you have religious practices that you lean on. You might be leaning into those as a form of self-care. So really, there's lots of different, I think we're just trying to kind of show that there's lots of just different options, and trying to find what works best for you. So this is called the self-care wheel, and there's lots of different versions of this online and out there. And actually in our handouts today, we're going to give you a copy of this. So, in case you can't see all of the writing on here. So definitely a handout that you can read everything. And then on the next page, there's actually a blank one. So when we talk about self-care, and we talk about balance and finding balance and that kind of thing, we can think of self-care kind of taking care of as almost like separate wheelhouses, I guess, taking care of our physical bodies versus taking care of our spiritual selves, our psychological selves, our emotional health. And so this wheel is a really great tool because it kind of gives some examples of different ways to take care of yourself psychologically, for example, versus spiritually. And then the second page has a blank sheet. So we would encourage you to take some time to think about, what do I do to take care of my physical health, for example? What do I do to take care of my personal health or my spiritual health? And really reflect on those. And it can be great because you have everything kind of laid out in front of you. And so I remember the first time that I did this activity, I had, there was like one or two sections that were like really well filled out. And I had lots of things that I did. And then there was like one or two that had like nothing in them. And so it's kind of a good visual for us to get. And then you can think about, okay, to maybe balance out my self-care plan, I could, you kind of know what areas you maybe need to work on a little bit more.
Okay. Thanks, Harley. So next we're going to talk about a term called self-compassion. So it's a little bit different than self-care, but of course, there'll be lots of overlap. But self-compassion is a term or a practice by Dr. Kristen Neff, who we're going to hear from in a video in a little bit. But self-compassion is about treating yourself the way that you would treat a friend who's having a hard time. And highlighting what that means is with that compassion. So compassion means to suffer with. So when we're thinking about self-compassion as a whole, this means learning to treat ourselves with the ability to suffer with the hard parts that are happening in our lives. So whether that mean, you're grieving, or if, mentally you're feeling exhausted, whatever that suffering may be, sitting with it, and then treating it and treating ourselves with compassion. So recognizing that suffering and then responding to it in a compassionate way. So essentially we want to, when we're helping ourselves, help ourselves with kindness and with understanding without judgment. That's such an important piece. So often we can get so hard on ourselves, if we're suffering, and we can be judgmental or critical about, I shouldn't be this sad, or why am I grieving like this, or I just need to get over it. There's so many phrases that we use towards ourselves that aren't treating ourselves with compassion. And a lot of that inner self-talk that we often have are also things that we likely wouldn't say or do to a friend that may be going through a hard time. It's like that natural instinct in our mind that it takes a lot of practice and a lot of practice. Self-compassion is a practice to be able to train and work on how we are responding to ourselves. And then when things get hard, if you're really going through a hard time, if you're grieving, if your child is grieving, things can start to change a little bit when we're treating ourselves with a bit more self-compassion. So we can learn to embrace what's happening in our lives, embrace what our struggles or our challenges might be, and regardless of what those imperfections are, and then to be able to help provide ourselves with that strength and that kindness in order to thrive and to work through some of those suffering. So we're going to watch a video called How Do You Help a Grieving Friend? And when you watch this, I want you to think about, to recognize what you notice in this video about how the characters, which character is which, who's the helping friend and who's helping, but recognize how the friend that's helping the person that's grieving, what they're doing and how they're responding to them and what they're saying. These are all practices that we want to encourage you as part of self-compassion to treat with yourself. Okay.
So what do we do about all the pain we see in the world? All the pain we feel in our own lives? And why does it seem like our best efforts to help somebody feel better always backfire? I've been studying intense grief and loss, baby death, violent crimes, accidents, suicides, and natural disasters. And I've learned something really interesting. Cheering people up, telling them to be strong and persevere, helping them move on, it doesn't actually work. It's kind of a puzzle. It seems counterintuitive, but the way to help someone feel better is to let them be in pain. This is true for those giant losses and the ordinary everyday ones. Educator Parker Palmer writes, "The human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed exactly as it is." He's talking about acknowledgement here. Acknowledgement is this really amazing multi-tool. It makes things better even when they can't be made right. For example, somebody's struggling. Their baby died, or there's been a bad accident, or their mom got sick, and they're just sad. It's way more helpful to join them in their pain than it is to cheer them up. But here's what we tend to do instead. You have 2 other children, you need to find joy in them. Or, you know what you need? You just need to go out dancing and shake it off. Or, I felt really sad once. Did you try acupuncture? We're not really sure what to do with someone's pain, so we do what we've been taught. We look on the bright side. We try to make people feel better. We give them advice. It's not like this is nefarious. We try to cheer people up because we think that's our job. We're not supposed to let people stay sad. The problem is, you can't heal somebody's pain by trying to take it away from them. Now, acknowledgement does something different. When a giant hole opens up in someone's life, it's actually much more supportive to acknowledge that hole and let pain exist. It's actually a radical act to let things hurt. It goes against what we've been taught. In order to really support you, I have to acknowledge that things really are as bad as they feel to you. If I try to cheer you up, you end up defending yourself and your feelings. If I give you advice, you feel misunderstood instead of supported. And I don't get what I want either, because I wanted you to feel better. It's pretty rare that you could actually talk somebody out of their pain. Rarely does the admonishment to look on the bright side actually heal things for someone. It just makes them stop telling you about their pain. It's so tempting to try to make things better. When somebody shares something painful, it's much more helpful to say, "I'm sorry that's happening. Do you want to tell me about it?" To be able to say, "This hurts," without being talked out of it, that's what helps. Being heard helps. It seems too simple to be of use, but acknowledgement can be the best medicine we have. It makes things better, even when they can't be made right.
Love that video.
Yeah, it's a great one for sure. And it's so helpful to watch when we are thinking about, supporting ourselves and of course supporting others and our kids. There's so many angles that we can look at this video and take from it. So
Absolutely.
I really like how, Kristen talks about, all those shoulds. We should be doing this. We should be, at this stage and looking on the bright side. So trying to, supporting ourselves, trying to kind of take away some of those barriers to us actually just sitting with and suffering and sitting with that suffering, right? And that's such a more supportive and helpful and natural way for us to cope with that pain and that suffering. So with self-compassion, there's three components that we want to kind of break down for you. So the first one is self-kindness. And so, this means is being loving towards ourselves instead of being self-critical and judging yourself so harshly. So we've kind of talked about this one the most already. The second one is common humanity. So acknowledging and recognizing that everyone suffers. You're not perfect. No one is perfect. And we're not alone in that. We're all human. We all have suffering. We all have challenges and imperfections. And just recognizing that's a shared experience, that you're not alone in that. And that sometimes is also what's so helpful about attending groups such as this or some of our bereavement groups, or when you're in grief, is just recognizing that you're not alone and you're not the only one that's going through this when it does feel so alone and so isolating. And then the third component is mindfulness. So noticing your struggle, noticing that suffering, feeling it instead of reacting to it or trying to cover it up or ignore it, just being with it, again, without that self-judgment or without overreacting or exaggerating what it is coming up. So that reactive piece. So instead of trying to fight it, just being more open to it and noticing it. So it's pretty hard to ignore our pain and our suffering and then feel compassion for it at the same time. So those two go definitely hand in hand, and both, if you break it down to these three pieces, can be really helpful when you're trying to engage in that practice of self-compassion. And so then I want to talk a little bit about what some self-compassion is not, because it sometimes can seem that it's self-pity, that it's self-indulgence. Or that it could be, working on our self-esteem, so these three are all very different components. So we're not pitying ourselves for, suffering or having imperfections or hurting. Self-compassion is just noticing what's difficult for us and noticing what's happening in our lives and sitting with that, rather than going outside of ourselves and, going to others or being down on ourselves about something. It's just noticing it and being okay with it and knowing that it's probably natural and normal what we're going through. So recognizing that it's not self-indulgent. So Orly talked a little bit about this. So it's not just indulging in things that make us feel good or engaging in some of those self-care practices that they might feel good and they might, spoiling ourselves with pedicures or going for massages or going for dinner or buying that extra chocolate bar. These are all great components if there's a balance, but it's knowing that that's not necessarily what self-compassion is voicing or saying is the most important piece of that. And then self-compassion is not self-esteem. So it's not necessarily, boosting our ego and saying, we're hurting, but we're also awesome too. It's not masking that. And I'm gonna throw in a video here by Dr. Kristen F., who I mentioned is kind of the creator and author of Everything Self-Compassion. She's gonna dive a little bit more deeper into what self-compassion is not, especially in relation to it not being self-esteem and some of those differences.
Self-compassion sounds a lot like self-esteem. Are they the same?
No, they're actually quite different. Self-esteem Self-esteem refers to an evaluation of self-worth, that thinking that you're a good person rather than being a bad person. And there's no doubt that lacking self-esteem can be problematic. If you think you're a bad person, you're going to be depressed, you're going to feel bad about yourself, you're not going to be motivated. But what psychologists are starting to find out is that having high self-esteem is not necessarily so good either, especially what do you have to do to get your high self-esteem? So for instance, in our culture, we need to feel special and above average just to feel okay about ourselves. Now think about that. If everyone has to feel above average at the same time, that's really impossible, right? For instance, 97% of drivers think they're better drivers than other people. Even people who recently caused a car accident think they're better drivers than other people. We do this in all areas of our lives. So our views of ourselves are not really realistic. They're inflated, and they're inflated so we can have high self-esteem. There are a lot of problems that come up with this. For instance, narcissism. All the emphasis on self-esteem in the schools, they've been tracking narcissism levels for the last 30 years. The current generation of college students today are the most narcissistic ever recorded, and that's partly because of all the self-esteem emphasis that they received while growing up. Because we need to feel above average to have high self-esteem, a lot of people tend to puff themselves up and put other people down. So where prejudice comes from, for instance, is feeling that my group is better than your group. Or think of the mean girl phenomenon, those catty girls who are always, bitching about the other girls at school. That's all of that an effort to have higher self-esteem, to feel good about yourself by putting other people down. The other problem with having to feel good about yourself, having to have high self-esteem, is it often means that you don't really see yourself clearly, because that would lower your self-esteem. So it's actually a lot easier if I blame your problems on you and it's your fault. That way I can salvage my self-esteem. And it's actually a real problem in relationship dynamics, this trying to salvage your ego all the time. And then one of the last other problems with self-esteem is that it goes up and down, right? So self-esteem is high when you have a success, but it takes a nosedive when you have a failure. So self-esteem goes up and down depending on, how well things are going for you. So it can be actually quite unstable.
So how is self-compassion different then?
So where self-esteem is an evaluation of your self-worth, self-compassion is really just a way of relating to yourself, whether you notice something you like about yourself, or if you notice something you don't like about yourself. So it's really a way of treating yourself kindly regardless of circumstances. And this is really important. First of all, to have self-compassion, you don't have to feel better than other people, because self-compassion is based on the sense of common humanity. It also means with self-compassion, you can see yourself much more clearly. You don't have to be narcissistic or kind of overblow your talents, because it's safe that you'll be kind to yourself if you admit, well, actually, I can use a little bit of help and growth in this area. And research actually shows that self-compassion gives you the same benefits as high self-esteem. In other words, because you care about yourself, you aren't anxious, you aren't depressed, you aren't beating yourself up all the time. But you don't have to do things like put other people down or blame all your problems on other people in order to feel good about yourself. And also the great thing about self-compassion is it gives you a sense of self-worth that's much more stable. So self-esteem goes up and down according to your latest success or failure. Self-compassion steps in precisely where self-esteem falls down. When you make a mistake, when you notice something about yourself that you don't really like, that's precisely when you can be self-compassionate and give yourself that sense of caring, concern that you really need. So the research is really showing that self-compassion offers all the benefits of self-esteem, but with fewer of the downsides. Self-esteem, so it's actually
Okay. So you might be wondering or thinking, so how can I engage in some of these self-care practices? So we're going to talk about a few examples. So guided meditations and exercises, or simply just breathing or deep breathing exercises are great ways and forms to doing that sitting with and that feeling with all of, and then treating ourselves with that compassion, just slowing down and letting be what we're feeling or what's coming up. journaling, so writing out your experiences. Maybe it's journaling about difficult emotions or some of that suffering, and writing compassion to yourself through journaling. Soothing touch, so often we'll offer a friend or a loved one a soothing touch, right? So offer yourself a hug, place your hand on your heart every once in a while. Just remember that physical component of it too. So giving and receiving compassion through connection from others, talking with others or professionals, others that are grieving, or friends and family about compassion and self-compassion. And again, that connection of how you would support someone else that's grieving, and receiving it and giving it they go hand in hand as well. Practicing gratitude, and changing your critical self-talk, which we talked a little bit about. So the first step for this one to really just be aware of is just being aware of what that self-talk is, and does it align with how you want to be treating yourself with compassion. So we're going to end this little self-compassion, I guess we're not quite at the end yet, but I want to read over a quote that kind of touches a little bit on and kind of summarizes a lot of this talk that we've had about self-compare and self-compassion. Okay, so everyone is a house with 4 rooms: a physical, a mental, an emotional, and a spiritual. Most of us tend to live in one room most of the time, but unless we go into every room every day, even if it's only to keep it aired, we are not a complete person. So this is just recognizing and talking about checking in with ourselves in all 4 of those rooms on a daily basis, or as often as you can. So just like grieving, we know that grief affects us in every single way. So we need to then treat ourselves and support ourselves and be aware of how we are taking care of our whole selves. So our physical body, our mental or cognitive, our psychological well-being, our emotional well-being, and then of course our spiritual. So it also talks about, just like when we're grieving or mourning, we tend to fall into certain styles of how we're grieving. So you can either be an instrumental griever or intuitive griever. And so that's, we tend to fall into these practices or patterns of ways that we grieve, just like ways that we typically go to take care of ourselves. So it's wanting to find a balance, making sure we are, grieving and taking care of ourselves, that in that more emotional side of things, but as well as that doing of things. So Orly talked about finding that balance on that wheel, checking in on all parts. So this is related to what this quote is also talking about.
One of the things that we like to talk about when we talk about self-care and self-compassion is just encouraging caregivers to ask for help. When we are, caring for a grieving child, it can be overwhelming at the best of times. But especially when there's grief, it just adds so many other layers. And a huge part of self-care is being able to reach out for support or ask for help, or maybe delegate certain tasks. It is really, really difficult to grieve alone. And so being able to ask for help, to receive support, is one of the best things that you can do. Again, you're modeling great behavior for your kids when you reach out for help, when you practice self-care, when you practice self-compassion. But without help, without these practices, we find that a lot of parents and caregivers can experience what we call caregiver burnout. And that's not good for anybody, including your kids. And so it's really important to be able to use these practices to make time to care for yourself and also to ask for help. So, just being able to have a break, right? Having, you time, that kind of thing. It's vital, especially if you are caring for grieving children. It's not easy. And so we have to think about prioritizing our own emotional, physical, intellectual well-being. One of the great, there's an article that we have, and it's this great kind of visual. Whenever you get on an airplane, They talk about, you know, the flight attendants come out and they kind of talk about how to do up your seatbelts and where the exits are, and they instruct you about how to put on an air mask if the air masks drop from the ceiling. And they always say, put an air mask on yourself first before you assist your children, assist beside you, that kind of thing, because it is most important that you take care of yourself first before you're able to care for other people. And so asking for help or taking that break, that could be you putting on your oxygen mask first, right? Because we want you taking care of yourself first and meeting your own needs first. For some people, you know, asking for help can be difficult. And so we encourage you just to think about this idea of embracing your own vulnerability. It's definitely scary, right, to ask for help. I think I work with a lot of parents who, you know, we don't want to come off as needy or, you know, that we're not able to handle parenting our kids or that kind of thing. But, and so it kind of, I think embracing that vulnerability, it makes us admit maybe that I'm not doing okay or that I'm needing help, and that can be hard, but grief is hard, right? It's absolutely valid that you would be struggling or that you would be having a hard time, and so having extra support and extra help is really important in there. We also encourage people to think about asking for help before you're at your breaking point. Again, this can be really difficult because I think things can sneak up on us, and all of a sudden we're really escalated, and it's almost like we're at our breaking point and then we are asking for help. And so we encourage people to be proactive with their self-care, proactive with self-compassion, and proactive with asking for help before you feel like you need it. And so much of self-care, I think, again, when things get tough, self-care goes out the window, but we also have to think about self-care not just as something that helps us when times are hard, but it's almost like a preventative thing, so from things getting to that breaking point, if possible. Remember that people love to help, especially I think when there's been a death. I think lots of people have this urge that they want to do something, but they're not really sure what. And so giving people a job to do can be kind of a way, to get people off your back. I think lots of bereaved people have this experience of everybody rushing and saying, if there's anything you need, let me know. And sometimes that can be overwhelming in itself. So it can be helpful to kind of give those people a job, and then helpful for you as well. And it can be, again, they can be really practical things. It can be, can you pick my kid up from hockey practice? Can you make a lasagna that I can throw in my freezer and we can have? People really, I think, especially those physical practical tasks, most of the time, I think people are really willing to jump in and help with those kinds of things. And then thinking about the importance of surrounding your child with other supportive caregivers or other supportive people in their life is so helpful. So again, we're thinking that you're modeling this behavior of asking for help and taking care of yourself for your kids, but you're also making sure that they have a network of people who care about them. If we think of like those 5 C's, who will care for me, if you're creating this really strong support network, it might be family members, but it could also be friends, like teachers, social workers. If your child has, a wide network of support, then it takes the burden a little bit, I think, off of you, so that you're not the only person who's able to provide that support. But it also helps that they just have a really wide support network. So talking about support networks, this is an activity that we have done before in group. And so this is kind of a your support network activity. And so you'll see on the left side of the table, we have different examples of things that somebody might do that would help you while you're grieving. And I would invite you, if there's other ideas of a role that you have that you could make your own, and think about, if it's not really fun or it's not really important for me to have somebody to study with, but it's really important for me to have someone who, maybe there's another activity, then you can put those in. And then thinking about, who can I turn to for this role? So I'll jump over to our little subtitle. Alan Wolfeld, who's a very prominent grief researcher, talks about the rule of thirds. And the idea of like the rule of thirds is that when we're grieving, when we have a loss, that about a third of our support network, either our friends and family, about a third of our circle of people will be really helpful when we're grieving. Another third will be kind of neutral, like they're not really helpful, but they're not really harmful. And then there will actually be a third group of people, that third of people who will actually be unhelpful. And often we talk to clients who say that the people that I thought were going to be there for me, unfortunately, were not those people. And then sometimes that people surprise you, right? The people that I kind of wouldn't have expected to be really supportive to me were. And so when we're thinking about the people that we're going to put in our support network, we want to be focusing on that third of people who are going to be really helpful, right? I don't know what your opinions are, Kayla, but I think that sometimes that group of people who are maybe more neutral, they might just not know what to do. And so they might be the good people for those practical supports, like rides, meals. Maybe they're not going to be emotionally available for you, but they will be kind of physically, practically able to support. So it's also about knowing who's in our support network and playing to their strengths as well. So I'd encourage you to, again, maybe when you're doing your self-care wheel, to also think about your support network and to really write down, try to get, you can put multiple people in who you can turn to for this role. You can also, you can have people in multiple categories, that's fine too. But really to think about that. I think also when we have this support network in front of us, when we are starting to feel overwhelmed, we're heading towards that breaking point, we don't have to really think about it. If we think about, okay, what do I need? I need someone to, enjoy a good laugh with. And I go over to my table and I think, okay, this is the person that I need to call right now. So it kind of simplifies it. We don't have to think about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Orla, I think that's great. I think a great way that you could utilize this activity is to make a support network table for your kids too, or for your family overall. You can even display this, somewhere in your fridge or in your kids' room, letting them know too who their support network are and who they can go to. So similar, Orly, like you said, all the caregivers in their lives, all of the family friends, their friends, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a great exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we have a kid version of that that's called People in My World, which, we can do this version with kids too, but yeah, great.
And we'll share some of these resources with you guys in those handouts that we mentioned. So to almost wrap up today, we want to end with just remembering this little quote. So you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first. So that's just that whole idea of filling our cup up first, having that perspective and that vision of a full cup, a half glass, or what is it? The glass half full, and just, so it's a bit of both, making sure that your cup is full so that you can take care of course, yourself and then your family and your kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to end with our teachable moments, as always, so we like to go over some more kind of practical ideas that you can continue this theme at home with your kids or with your teens and your family. So ways that you can continue self-care and self-compassion outside of today or outside of your group. So you can talk with your kids about what you learned this week. You can talk to them about, what self-care is, what self-care is not, what self-compassion is. You can talk about some of the exercise or do some of the exercise that we talked about today. So like we said, that self-care wheel or that support network activity sheet. You can let your kids know about ways that you engage in self-care and certain self-care practices that help you. You can help come up with self-care practices or self-compassion practices that you can do together as a family or individually. I think this is really opening up that discussion and letting your kids know how and why this is also important in ways that you also engage in these practices. And you could also help with recognizing moments that maybe you need a break and letting your children know what you're feeling. So again, all about that, naming what's coming up for you, feeling it, and then letting your kids know how you're going to respond or what you're going to do if you're having a hard time. So maybe it's saying, I'm feeling really, really sad right now. And I think what I need to do is to sit outside for a few minutes So I'm going to go do that for myself. And that's part of my, emotional self-care practice. Or, or if you're recognizing that your child may need to take a break, or that maybe they've reached their limits, perhaps it's looking at their self-care wheel or talking to them about what could you do right now to help take care of yourself? What do you need right now? And encouraging them to, have a look at that self-care wheel or engage in one of those practices together, and being there with each other, right? That's the whole, we've talked about so much in our whole module series about just being present and being supportive with our kids. So that means engaging in self-care and self-compassion together as a unit, or respecting that privacy or that space if that's what's needed too. But just having those conversations together.
Absolutely. If I could jump in, I might just say, with kids, I think we talk a lot, it's about like coping strategies, right? Maybe not as much about self-care. I think that, us as adults, it's not a fair expectation for us to expect our children to know how to practice self-care. And that's something that we definitely have to do with them and really talk through with them. And, we talk a lot about, you hear a lot about, self-regulating and regulation, and the child needs to be able to regulate themselves. And at a certain age, definitely that's an expectation that we can have of kids. But really with younger kids, I'm thinking and especially when there's been a loss, we need to co-regulate with them. We need to practice that self-care with them. We need to, it's not kind of a realistic expectation that they would be able to do it on their own. And so, I think it's doing exactly what Kayla said, and modeling that behavior, and then also engaging in those, coping strategies, self-care strategies, regulating strategies together with our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point, Orly. So this is some additional resources we wanted to share with you guys today. So selfcompassion.org is Dr. Kristen Neff's website, which she has lots of other articles, self-compassion practices, mindfulness practices, more videos if you're interested in learning more about self-compassion. So there's her website there. I think we've mentioned this one a little bit, but What's Your Grief is a great website for everyone, for anyone who is grieving, for anyone that is anticipating a loss, for supporting ourselves, supporting our kids, being a caregiver. There's so many great articles and resources, and there's e-courses that you can access on this website, and I know that there's lots also on self-care and self-compassion, maybe not self-compassion specifically, but on self-care and nurturing yourself and that sort of thing. And then we wanted to mention some really great podcasts that are out there. So these don't necessarily perfectly align with our topic for today, but we wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of some really great podcasts that are out there that kind of may wrap around or talk about a lot of the topics that we've talked about in all of our series. So there's one called Unlocking Us with Brene Brown. I believe you can access this on Spotify, podcasts, online. I think most of these podcasts you can access on all different platforms or wherever you listen to your podcasts. But Unlocking Us with Brene Brown covers a bunch of different topics on I forget what the whole Unlocking Us podcast is about, but I know there's a certain podcast on grief with David Kessler. There's lots about checking in with yourself, being vulnerable, and supporting yourself, and just recognizing, reflecting, as well as doing a lot of those practices with your family. Or I don't know if you want to, I just can't, do you want to build on that one at all, or?
Grief Out Loud or Unlocking Us?
Sure, if you want to, either or. If you want to build on anything on Unlocking Us, I think I explained it okay, but I don't know.
Yeah. She has different topics. I've heard there's some about anxiety. Brene Brown's big thing is vulnerability and shame. And so she's a social worker. So I think it's very much those different topics. She had varied topics. I've only listened to a few.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you. And then yes, Grief Out Loud by the Dougie Center. This one also incorporates a lot of different speakers, as well as family members and caregivers that have experienced a loss themselves. There's professionals that speak on this one. I think Grief Out Loud, or correct me if I'm wrong, is a weekly podcast is released, but there's lots of different varying topics as well on grieving and grieving, or supporting our grieving children or teens.
I'm actually not sure how often they release, but the Dougie Center is a children's grief organization, and so they would be very specific to grieving children and youth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the Mindfulness and Grief podcast as well. This one I haven't actually listened to before, but I've heard some really great things. It looks really great. There's lots of topics again on this, the whole conversation about mindfulness and compassion in relation to grief. So we encourage you to check those out if podcasts are your sort of thing. Are just some references that helped us with today's presentation. And so lastly, this is a wrap on our 5-part module series, or our 5-part group. So thank you so much for being here with us and for listening and taking part in these. As we had mentioned, St. Joseph's Hospice has a number of grief programs for adults, for children, for caregivers. So if you're interested in finding out more information about any of our programs or services, or connecting with us about any questions that you may have, please feel free to call our office, and the phone number is listed here. You can ask to speak with either Orly or Kayla or one of the supportive services team members. And our email here is supportiveservices@sjhospice.ca. So we can definitely connect with you via email as well. So thank you so much for being here, and we hope that you enjoyed all of our modules as part of this series. And that's about all for me.
Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, we hope this has been helpful for you. And yes, we hope to kind of continue these conversations as time goes on.